Hey, I am Winston,
And I'm Alexi.
and this is Mental Medicine. Today we have Wendy Sefcik. Uh, she is a guest for today, and she'll be talking to us about her story and her experiences with mental health. Uh, so, Wendy, what is your story? How did you get to your point in life right now? What's the story of everything around you, your surroundings and stuff?
Well, thanks for having me. My name is Wendy Sefcik, as Winston mentioned. 13 years ago, I lost my 16-year-old son, TJ, to suicide. And prior to that, the topic of mental health, teen depression, suicide never really was on my radar. I didn't know it was something I needed to be concerned about. And after losing TJ to suicide, one of the ways that I coped was trying to figure out how could this have happened to our family. We had three boys. My husband and I are blessed with a wonderful marriage, a really great intact family, and we were shocked that this could have happened to our child. So after doing a lot of research, I was really shocked to learn that every year in this country we lose almost 49,000 people to suicide, and 6,000 of them are youth. So we knew then that we weren't alone in what we had gone through, that other people had suffered the same fate. And we wondered why people weren't talking about it. With TJ, what we found, as I said, he was the one of three children. He was our middle son. He was a really outgoing, funny, athletic, intelligent boy. And when he entered his teenage years, we did start to notice changes in his behavior. He was more irritable, picking fights with his brothers, but he was still doing really well in school. He didn't seem to enjoy things he had previously enjoyed as much, like his sports. But we just chalked it up to the teenage years. And that was not what was going on. TJ was hurting. He was struggling. These we now know are some of the red flags for teen depression. We did take TJ to a therapist to see if he could get some help for, what was going on. But unfortunately, we didn't, he was not properly diagnosed. And before we really could wrap our heads around what was going on with our son, and TJ wasn't able to articulate it, we did lose him to suicide. So it really made us realize that we needed to talk about it. We needed people to understand that it's really important to take care of your mental health. It's important to have conversations. It's important to share what some of the red flags could be that somebody might be struggling, and know that it's very different for everyone. There's no one face of suicide. There's no one face of someone who struggles with their mental health. But what there is there's a lot of help available if you know how to get that help and if you ask for help.
Could you maybe elaborate on the symptoms that you could see right before a person actually dies of suicide? So could you elaborate on that?
Yes, so the most important thing to remember is changes in typical behavior. Because I am going to go over some symptoms, but the most important thing is if you notice changes in someone's behavior, your friend, yourself, somebody that you care about, a classmate, reach out, ask about what might be going on with that person. Some of the things that you might see is somebody is kind of disconnecting, disengaging from things they typically enjoyed. So that could be, somebody always loved playing baseball and suddenly they don't want to sign up for the team, or somebody always was very active in the theater program in school and suddenly they're not going to go out for the play this year. Somebody that typically did very well in school, their grades are falling. Their friends might notice, Wendy always used to come out with us. She never wants to come out anymore. She's staying home by herself all the time. We also can see this extreme irritability, right? A lot of times people think when people are depressed that they're sad, they're curled up in a ball, but a lot of times what we see are people that are angry, right? That are very irritable. They lash out quickly. So that could be something that you see as well. You could certainly also see the sadness and the withdrawal, but it's not always that way. When it comes to suicide risk, you want to really pay attention to talk, behavior, and mood. The type of talk, we know that people who die by suicide often will talk about it in some way in the days and weeks leading up to their death. For example, they might say something directly, something like, what's the point? I don't even want to be here anymore. I'm going to kill myself. They may say something directly. And a lot of times people think, oh, they're just being dramatic. They're just, kind of joking about it. You have to take it seriously every time and say, hey, I know you seem like you were kind of just joking, but I have noticed some other changes in your behavior. What is something going on? Are you really thinking of killing yourself? You want to have that conversation. So the other things, or they could say, is it could be less direct. It could be things like saying, I'm just no good. Everyone would be better off without me. I'm a burden. What's the point? Life is so hard. I wish I would go to sleep and not wake up. So it could be things that are less direct, but we want to pay attention every single time to any kind of talk. The behaviors would be some of the things I've already mentioned, those withdrawal from friends or activities, maybe substance use. Somebody who never drank is suddenly drinking and getting drunk, or somebody that would have an occasional drink is now really going over the top and getting themselves completely drunk, or using other substances that typically is out of character for them. So those are some of the other behaviors you want to look at. And mood is mood that you would expect. Somebody that seems very overwhelmed, that seems, as I said, very, very irritable, or just completely withdrawing from things, seems particularly anxious when that's not their norm. So any behaviors, moods, or talk that is not characteristic for the person is what you want to look out for and have a conversation.
How would, parents help their children go through this? Because sometimes it's so hard to differentiate. Teens are just, very angsty. They're very, very impulsive sometimes, and it's just very hard to tell.
Yes, and it absolutely can be very, very difficult. And that's why I would encourage anybody to just have conversations. Let people know that if they're starting to have these feelings, like this young man that you mentioned, that they feel that they can talk about it to somebody. Because very often, because suicide is very stigmatized, people don't talk about it. People that may be struggling and having thoughts like this young man, they don't feel that they can go to anybody about it. So they keep it inside. And like you said, somebody who might be impulsive and be thinking these things and not being able to share it, that's very, very dangerous. So we want parents, just like most parents will have conversations with their kids about substance use, right? From a pretty young age, right? You shouldn't, use vapes, or you shouldn't, drink alcohol. You shouldn't, try marijuana because your brain is developing. A lot of parents have conversations about that, and that's not a very comfortable topic. Parents often have conversations with their kids from a very young age to make sure that they understand their body is theirs, that nobody should be touching them in places that are inappropriate or make them feel uncomfortable, that it's okay to get help and to let somebody know if you're having those experiences. Again, it could be an uncomfortable topic, but it's an important conversation that has to be had. And it's the same thing with mental health and suicide. We need to get more comfortable talking to youth from a younger age that their mental health, it exists for everybody, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good, and sometimes it gets to a crisis point where people are having these feelings about wanting to kill themselves, and we need them to know that it's okay to talk about it, to ask for help, and to say, hey, I've been having these thoughts about doing something to myself, about killing myself, and get help. So for this young man, one of the things that we do know is that a suicidal crisis is often, the feelings can come on very quickly, very intensely, and then they can also fade just as quickly and just as intensely. So it's really important that we get people help at that point of crisis. And a big part of that is letting people know that they can have these conversations, that they can ask for help, and where to get that help. It's really important that everybody knows about 988. It's just like we have 911 for a physical health emergency. People can call or text 988 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to be connected with a trained listener who could help to de-escalate these very, very difficult feelings of suicide and to get that person connected to resources that are in the area. So we want to make sure that people know what the resources are. Another thing that we have here in New Jersey for our youth is Second Floor Youth Helpline. You can call or text Second Floor 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It doesn't have to be a crisis. It could just feel, I'm feeling overwhelmed with tests. I had a fight with my friends. I had a fight with my parents. You'll just be connected with someone trained to help you navigate through what can be a difficult situation, even if it's not crisis, but it's a hard situation. So it's important that we know what the resources are. We want our youth to know who they could go to in the schools to talk to, who are the trusted adults that surround them. So that could be coaches, it could be teachers, it could be administrators, it could be school counselors, it could be parents, it could be friends' parents, it could be an aunt, an uncle, an older cousin. There's a lot of trusted adults that youth can go to ask for help and to get connected to resources if they start to have feelings like the young man that you described. Because very often, as you said, these struggles can be invisible and we may not see them on the outside. So we need to be more comfortable having these conversations before a crisis is occurring.
Yeah, and you mentioned conversation and discussing this with anyone you can who could probably help you through this. But back then, I kind of, you read back all these articles, these news things from way back in the 1900s, maybe, or maybe even mid-1900s. And you see no sort of account of any mental health being brought up. And do you think this sort of plays into the fact that why people don't talk about it as much now? Is it because we haven't been able to grasp the ability of mental health yet at that time, or is it just because it was just sort of a bad thing to talk about? Why do you think nowadays there's such a barrier around parents to be able to talk to their youth about mental health at first?
Because it was historically stigmatized. It really wasn't that long ago in our history that many people who struggled with mental health issues were put in institutions, maybe for their entire lives. We did lobotomies, we did brain surgery and cut away people's brains if they were struggling. So there was a lot that has happened in our history that made people not want to talk about mental health struggles. It wasn't that long ago that suicide was considered a crime. That's one of the reasons that we don't say anymore someone committed suicide, because that terminology can be stigmatizing. People commit crimes. When people die by suicide, one way you can think about it is their brain was sick at that moment in crisis. That doesn't mean it was a mental illness, but it means at that moment something in their brain was in crisis and they died by suicide. But because we have stigmatized the topic of suicide, for historically, it makes it harder for people to talk about it now. And this is the case for a lot of things. Back in the 80s, AIDS, when we were dealing with the AIDS epidemic, people didn't want to talk about HIV. People didn't want to talk about AIDS. It was kept very, very quiet. But now we know that with research, that there's so much that we can do for people that are struggling, and now we can save lives. We need to do the same thing with mental health and the topic of suicide. We need more research. We need to do a better job of helping people who need help. And we need to learn from history, right? Suicide is nothing new. People have been dying by suicide as long as humans have been in existence. So it's not a new phenomenon, but how it's discussed and talked about is changing, and I do think even in the 13 years since my son TJ died, there's been a lot of changes. Schools are now, required to have mental health education for students. They are required. Teachers are required to have training in suicide prevention, to have an awareness, and to understand how to have these conversations. So we're making progress, we are making changes, but we do still need to get that point across to parents, because parents are still very often fearful of having these conversations. One of the greatest myths of suicide is that talking about it will plant the seed of thought in someone's head. If they hadn't been thinking about it before. And we know that from research that that's just not true. If you have a conversation with somebody about suicide safely and in an educated manner, if anything, if that person is struggling, it's almost like releasing a pressure release valve. You're going to give them permission to talk about it and get connected to help. And if somebody isn't having those thoughts, it's not going to plant that seed of thought and make somebody take action to end their lives. So what we need to do is we need to debunk a lot of the myths that are associated with having these conversations. And that's just going to take place with a lot more raising awareness and education through things just like this podcast, having these conversations in a safe manner.
There's this thing in schools now where children are suffering from loneliness, and I think that kind of contributes to many of the mental health issues out currently. So what do you say would be some of the concerns you have for children nowadays? I mean, there's new technology out there. There's new, software out there as well for that technology. And this kind of goes to social media as well, being a very, very bad thing. So what are some of your biggest concerns for children nowadays?
Well, I do think, as you mentioned, we are living at a time where even though people seem to be more connected than they ever have been, they're reporting feeling lonelier than they ever have before. We do see this with our youth. We have something called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that does an anonymous survey on high school youth every 2 years. And we know from that survey that kids are reporting these feelings of loneliness, sadness, despair. And I do absolutely believe that social media plays a role in this. I will say that social media is not going anywhere, and it can have positive effects, right? It can help you to feel connected, but it can also have the opposite. One of the biggest problems with social media is comparison, right? If you look at somebody's social media feed, very often looks like they have the perfect life. Everything is going perfect for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Why? Because people tend to post only the good and not the struggles. So that makes somebody else who might be looking at that feed think, wow, like everybody else has a perfect life, and look at me. I'm the only one that's sitting at home, doesn't have any friends. I'm not taking these trips. I don't have these clothes. I'm not surrounded by friends. So it can be really, really prey on somebody's mind and impact their mental health. There is nothing that can ever replace connecting with people one-on-one, sitting in a room, having conversations. That's what we need. We need more connections. We need to get back to that. And that doesn't mean, cell phones aren't going to go away. They're not going anywhere. So I'm not going to stand here and say, what we have to do is get rid of the cell phones. That's just not going to happen. We have to learn to work with what we have. And we can certainly do a better job. We can keep, definitely as parents, we can not get, put off the time that our children are getting phones and smartphones. There are other ways to be connected. Very often, we get kids' phones early for safety. So we can maybe figure out better ways to do that. We definitely all can play a role by just being nicer to each other, right? Really being thoughtful. It's a lot easier to post something mean and negative than to say something to somebody's face. So I think we all need to check ourselves before we post something. I know that there are some youth, I can't remember what the app is called, but they actually developed an app that makes you take a pause before you actually post something. So, you create your post, and this app kind of is a next stage in there where it makes you kind of review it and think, do you really want to put this out there? So I do think it would be, we live in an age where everything is moving so fast and we do things very, very quickly, is to kind of hit that pause button and think a little bit about what we're saying, doing, posting, and how that might impact another person. And to be really mindful that kindness should always be our guide in all things that we do. And that's not something that maybe we can change for everyone and everybody, but each of us can play a role. And our own behaviors, we need to take control of how we're behaving, what we're putting out there into the universe, what we're putting out there on social media. And that's something that's all within our individual power. We need to be able to have conversations and have discussions. We need to be able to agree to disagree, and not thinking somebody's bad just because they don't think like we do, and then have those kind of posts. So there's a lot that is in with our individual control, but it's just going to take time. And I like to call it the like a ripple effect, right? If one of us does the right thing, puts a little bit of kindness out there, that's going to ripple out to many, many other people. So we can continue that, just working a little harder at being nice to each other and respectful.
Actually, I don't have social media. I think it's sort of a good thing, sort of a bad thing. I'm not up to date with people, but at the same time, I get to save, or at least maintain my thought process, maintaining my positivity itself. But at the same time, contributes to my social anxiety because I can't, people are up to date with everything else, whereas I don't have the topics. But I do agree that talking to people face to face is much better. When you're on your screen or on Zoom, you're talking to a screen and you don't have that feel. You don't have, I guess, the soul of the person speaking to you. That kind of helps you when you look in someone's eyes to articulate a bit better. I would agree. For me, social media is more of a bad thing. It's kind of ironic because I'm recording this on Spotify, which is social media. It's definitely very weird for me to say that, but I do agree with that statement there. My next question here would be...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say,
Sure.
because I think what you're illustrating is very often things are not all good or all bad, right? So there is, and it's very personal. Like, you have a choice not to use social media, and I applaud that, right? We don't all have to have social media just because most people are. You've made a conscious choice, but you have found a way to use technology for something that you believe in and that is positive, and that's, creating this podcast. So I think it's changing that view that all things are not always the same. Everything isn't always all good or all bad, and that's what we have to just be more open on that your way isn't always the right way, my way is not the right way or the wrong way, that it can be both. Two things can exist at the same time.
Yeah, with social media, usually, I told this to another guest already, biologically, some people originated in tribes, and tribes are, smaller societies, smaller communities, and that's easier for people to process in their brains. So by using social media, expanding this worldwide, the social media is effectively breaking the way our minds think. It's making us more aggressive towards each other, and I think that's because we just can't process the fact that there's this many people and there's so many different opinions that are different from our own. And I think the main reason for these opinions is because our beliefs, which are raised from, our parents and from influential people around us. But some of these influential people also have their own problems. What would you say is some problems that you think parents might deal with, especially when trying to raise their children correctly? What do you think is something parents sometimes do that commonly is, I don't really want to say a mistake, but sort of just they did not realize the cost of their actions.
Well, I'm certainly not an authority on parenting. I will tell you that parenting is the most difficult job in the world. I think most parents, their intention is to do no harm. They love their children and they want to do right. But we can only do what we can do with the information we have at the time. And my experience is, illustrates that. In my worldview, I really didn't know anything about mental health. I didn't know anything about suicide. So I didn't know it was something that I needed to protect my children against. Which is why it is important to have conversations. So, my only advice would be to remain open-minded, to be lifelong learners, to open our worldview to things that are going out there, and to never have the view of not my kid, because I do think that things that we might think will never impact our family very well can. So it's important to constantly be learning and opening our mind to what things that could impact us or others, to be more supportive and less judgmental, right? A lot of times something might happen in another family and you'll say, well, that could never happen to one of my children. I see that a lot with suicide. That wouldn't happen to my kid. But when you really start to learn, that it actually could be any kid, anybody. Anybody can struggle. Suicide is very complex. It's not usually about one thing or one event in a person's life, but we are human beings, and as human beings, we're complicated, and there are often many things going on in our life at different times. So we want to understand that while we might not be able to see something on the outside, there could be something going on with someone. And as parents, we have to love our kids. And we have to try to accept them for exactly who they are. But listen, it's very, very hard to be a parent, and to understand, what your child's needs may be, because every individual's needs are different. So it's just about keeping our eyes open, our ears open, paying attention, and trying to do the best that you can for the child that you have.
I think the reward system is sometimes flawed because they kind of rely too much on that feeling after they've done something. That kind of leads to them later on in life, some children to develop more mental health issues because they've always been used to getting something great after they've done something. And when that great thing turns out to fail, then they can't deal with it. So that's something I notice as well in society.
If I could just jump in, I think it's really important for when raising children and for children to know that life isn't perfect 24/7, that there are going to be failures, there are going to be disappointments. Very often parents want to protect and they don't want our kids to hurt at all. So we try to fix things for our kids when really that's necessary, right? There are things that are going to go wrong in your life, but sometimes we just have to do things because it's the right thing to do, or because it's something that gives us pleasure, but not because there's going to be a reward at the end, right? One of the things that we did, this wasn't like this when I was growing up, but it was when my children were growing up, is everybody, if they participated in something, everyone did get a reward. Everybody got a trophy. Whereas back when I was growing up, only, one child was selected to be the most valuable player or something like that, and they got the trophy. The other kids didn't. So was that disappointing for some kids? Absolutely. But it also is teaching us resilience, right? That sometimes we're going to be the one that gets that award, and sometimes somebody else is. There are lessons in that. There are lessons in hurt. There are lessons in the hard. I will tell you, as a mother who lost a child to suicide, there have been lessons in that. That's one of the most hardest things anybody can live through. But I've learned a lot through that loss, and I have chosen to move forward in the hard that has happened in my life, and to learn from it and to do better, to do better with my other sons, to share what I've learned. And I think that's something that we can all do. There's going to be disappointments in life, but our kids need to know that sometimes you're going to fail, sometimes things aren't going to go our way, and you have it within you. Everybody, I believe, has strength and this resilience and the power within them to move forward and move through the hard and the difficult.
In my school, people have all these friend groups, and they sort of just get along. They're always happy, laughing in the halls. And you said TJ also had a bunch of friends. He was very happy, very funny. Why do you think people with these sort of mental health issues tend to avoid talking about with their friends?
Well, I think, and again, I can't speak for everybody, but I can tell you that I think with TJ, he wanted to be liked, and he wanted people to see this very strong, charismatic, funny young man, and he didn't want people, he probably perceived his struggles as a form of weakness, and he wanted to be perceived as this very strong young man, and he didn't want to show what he saw was this darker side of him. I can't speak for how everybody feels, but I do think a lot of people do put out, this outward persona of what they want people to see, and then they hide those other parts of them. And because it is a tough world, right? People do judge us, and that's, just something that we have in our society. So people just want to put out there in public the public persona, and they hide very often what's inside. Hopefully most people do have somebody that they can be honest with, but a lot of times they don't. I would wish my children would know that they could come to me with anything. I still live with that guilt and that pain that TJ didn't feel that he could come to his father and I to really reveal what was going on with him. I'll never have those answers. I love my children no matter what, no matter who or what they were thinking. And it pains me to know that TJ could have been struggling so much and wasn't able to reveal that to us. So I can't really speak to why that is, but I do think it's not an uncommon phenomenon that people put a perception out there, like you mentioned your peers in school, they in these groups, and they seem so happy, and I'm sure some of them legitimately are, and then I'm sure some of those youth are struggling at that time when they're kind of masking with that smile and that laughter, because we do know that people can be hurting deeply inside and smiling on the outside.
All right. Thank you, Wendy, for being on this podcast. Once again, I'm Winston.
I'm Alexi.
And this has been Mental Medicine. Thank you. Have a great day.